image, and genetically of sight, sound, taste, or even mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. There's a signpost up ahead. Next stop, Jake Steves. Hey, it's long-haired freaky dude here, and today I'm going to review the novel The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Before I proceed, let me warn you that nothing I say can truly personify the absolute majesty of this book. In order to do so, the only way to capture the perfect essence of it would be to read it for yourself, which I highly recommend you do. Allow me to say that I keep spoilers to the minimum, but I will reveal a few things so as to help you decide whether or not to read this book. But most of the things I reveal will be discovered in the first chapter anyway, so. This book, in the broadest sense, is about an architect and his struggles in the world of architecture. At least that's what people like to tell you. I thought I'd be bored to death with this theme. I didn't know much about architecture, nor did I have any interest to learn about it. But after reading it, I found out that it's so much more than that. It's about morals, values, the ideal man, how to live a truly happy life. It is about Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. Now, that theme might seem quite dull as well, but when it's marinated into this wonderful story, it becomes bright and spectacular. Architecture becomes a background and not a crucial part of the plot. It could have been replaced with any other theme or background: writing, sculpting, cooking, video making, I mean, you name it, and the plot would have been just as good. The Fountainhead is third-person omniscient, which means it narrates the story of many characters. Usually whenever this happens, the book gets a bit choppy and things don't fit together all so well. We tend to forget a few vital characters and their importance to the plot. But this doesn't happen in The Fountainhead. The way it progresses is very smooth and subtle. The transition from person to person, day to day, or even month is almost seamless, so that by the time you realize it happens, you're almost a page into the next setting. This makes it very hard to find a stopping point, and they almost wouldn't be possible if it weren't for the chapters, chapter divisions. It's as it should be, one whole book, not a bunch of single narrations of events all pasted together into one heap of pages. The protagonist of this book is Howard Roark, an architect. He doesn't design buildings the way his clients want them designed. He designs buildings the way he wants them designed. He's very stern about this. He doesn't build based off of old ideas like the Renaissance or colonial. He builds based off the purpose and the needs of the building and where it's located. Nothing more, nothing ornamental. In other words, he creates his buildings from his mind, nothing more. He doesn't build for fame, for money, or to be admired. He builds quite simply because he enjoys building. And he will only design a building when he enjoys building it. His opposite, Peter Keating, builds based off of old ideas. He doesn't create his own buildings, he just jumbles other ideas together and calls it his own. Nothing about his buildings are original. He builds for fame, money, and admiration. The Fountainhead describes the life of these two men, the ideal man and his alter ego. Now, in this book is also one of the most unique and strangest characters I've possibly had to face in a book, as of yet. That is Dominique Francon. I won't talk about her, I'll let you discover her on your own, but she is quite the character. There are also some other very interesting people in here, but some quite loopy, but I'll let you discover them on your own as well. So, in summary, all the characters in this book are quite convincing, very believable, and you start to grow feelings for them after a while. The plot itself is very good, straightforward, not too confusing, and leaves you with plenty of suspense. There is also much subplot woven into the story as well, but it all fits together. But you don't keep reading the book so that you can find out the conclusion to the plot. No. You keep reading so that you can remain in the very believable, too believable world created by Rand. You keep reading so that you can continue interacting with the characters as long as possible. Only a few other books that I've read so far have been able to match or greater this effect, and for example, some of those are Count of Monte Cristo or Atlas Shrugged. The ending was just pure epicness. Not as epic as Atlas Shrugged, but an ending worthy of its author. I usually rate books based on how depressed I am to have finished them. The harder it is to rip me from the world, the better. But that just wasn't the case with this book. The ending was a subtle closing, a violent conclusion to everything that objectivism is. It eases you away from the book, but not in a bad way. At the end, I didn't feel depressed that it was over. I felt motivated to spread the ideals of objectivism. And that is what makes it one of the most epic books I've come across. The ending continues, the book continues even whenever you have finished it. The way Ayn Rand can craft the English language is embarrassing. Not for her, but for me. To think that she was born and raised in Russia and didn't speak fluent English until her 20s, and that she now knows it better than me or anyone I know, that's just remarkable. I happen to think that she's one of the greatest English novelists of all time, and it's not even her native language. That's pretty good. Whenever I read an excerpt from this book, you'll understand what I mean. She's so descriptive, so complex, so simple, so realistic, so elegant. The paragraphs are endless. The text is small, but do not become overwhelmed. All that becomes oblivious once you start reading. You just become totally submersed and forget about the overwhelming smallness of the text. Another thing I'd like to point out is that there's a perfect balance of narration and dialogue. And to go along with that, the character's thoughts aren't portrayed as dialogue either. They're portrayed as narration, which is interesting and I like it. So, The Fountainhead is a magnificent novel, or an epic if I may call it such. But this isn't one of those books that you can read in just a few days. It takes a while to read it. Not because it's hard to understand or because you need a dictionary every other sentence, but because you fear coming to the end. So naturally you read slower. You fear what life will be like once you have come to the conclusion of this novel. But in the end, you aren't unsettled, and you leave the book with motivation rather than disappointment of it being over. Now, to conclude my unworthy book review, not that I should feel it's unworthy, I'm an objectivist, remember? But I shall read a few pages from the first chapter to help you decide whether or not this is a book for you. This may take quite a while, so if you gotta leave, so be it. If you want to stay for my reading, go ahead. Part 1, Peter Keating, Chapter 1. Howard Roark laughed. He stood naked at the edge of a cliff. The lake lay far below him. A frozen explosion of granite burst in flight to the sky over motionless water. The water seemed immovable, the stone flowing. The stone had the stillness of one brief moment in battle when thrust meets thrust, and the currents are held in a pause more dynamic than motion. The stone glowed, wet with sun rays. The lake below was only a thin steel ring that cut the rocks in half. The rocks went on into the depth unchanged. They began and ended in the sky, so that the world seemed suspended in space, an island floating on nothing, anchored to the feet of the man on the cliff. His body leaned back against the sky. It was a body of long, straight lines and angles, each curve broken into planes. He stood, rigid, his hands hanging at his sides, palms out. He felt his shoulder blades drawn tight together, the curve of his neck, and the weight of the blood in his hands. He felt the wind behind him, in the hollow of his spine. The wind waved his hair against the sky. His hair was neither blonde nor red, but the exact color of a ripe orange rind. He laughed at the thing which had happened to him that morning, and the things which now lay ahead. He knew that the days ahead would be difficult. There were questions to be faced and a plan of action to be prepared. He knew that he should think about it. He knew also that he would not think, because everything was clear to him already, because the plan had been set long ago, and because he wanted to laugh. He tried to consider it, but he forgot. He was looking at the granite. He did not laugh as his eyes stopped in awareness of the earth around him. His face was like a law of nature, a thing one could not question, alter, or implore. It had high cheekbones over gaunt hollow cheeks, gray eyes, cold and steady, a contemptuous mouth, shut tight, the mouth of an executioner or a saint. He looked at the granite to be cut, he thought, and made into walls. He looked at a tree, to be split and made into rafters. He looked at a streak of rust on the stone and thought of iron ore under the ground, to be melted and to emerge as girders against the sky. These rocks, he thought, are here for me, waiting for the drill, the dynamite, and my voice, waiting to be split, ripped, pounded, reborn, waiting for the shape my hands will give them. Then he shook his head, because he remembered that morning and that there were many things to be done. He stepped to the edge, raised his arms, and dived down into the sky below. He cut straight across the lake to the shore ahead. He reached the rocks where he had left his clothes. He looked regretfully about him. For 3 years, ever since he had lived in Stanton, he had come here for his only relaxation, to swim, to rest, to think, to be alone and alive, whenever he could find 1 hour of spare, which had not been often. In his new freedom, the first thing he had wanted to do was to come here, because he knew that he was coming for the last time. That morning he had been expelled from the Architectural School of Stanton Institute of Technology. He pulled his clothes on, old denim trousers, sandals, a shirt with short sleeves, and most of its buttons missing. He swung down a narrow trail among the boulders to a path running through a green slope, the road below. He walked swiftly, with a loose, lazy expertness of motion. He walked down the long road, in the sun. Far ahead, Stanton lay sprawled on the coast of Massachusetts, a little town as a setting for the gem of its existence, the great institute rising on a hill beyond. The township of Stanton began with a dump. A gray mound of refuse rose in the grass. It smoked faintly. Tin cans glittered in the sun. The road led past the first house to a church. The church was a Gothic monument of shingles painted pigeon blue. It had stout wooden buttresses supporting nothing. It had stained glass windows with heavy terraces of imitation stone. It opened the way into long streets edged by light, exhibitionist lawns. Behind the lawns stood wooden piles tortured out of all shape, twisted into gables, turrets, dormers, bulging with porches, crushed under huge sloping roofs. White curtains floated at the windows. A garbage can stood at the side door, flowing over. An old Pekingese sat upon a cushion on a doorstep, its mouth drooling. A line of diapers fluttered in the wind between the columns of a porch. People turned to look at Howard Roark as he passed. Some remained staring at him with sudden resentment. They could give no reason for it. It was an instinct his presence awakened in most people. Howard Roark saw no one. For him the streets were empty. He could have walked there naked without concern. He crossed the heart of Stanton, a broad green edged by shop windows. The windows displayed new placards announcing, "Welcome to the class of 22. Good luck, class of 22." The class of 22 of the Stanton Institute of Technology was holding its commencement exercises at afternoon. Roark swung into a side street where at the end of a long row, on a knoll over a green ravine, stood the house of Mrs. Keating. He had boarded at that house for 3 years. Mrs. Keating was out on the porch. She was feeding a couple of canaries in a cage suspended over the railing. Her pudgy little hand stopped in midair when she saw him. She watched him with curiosity. She tried to pull her mouth into a proper expression of sympathy. She succeeded in only betraying that the process was an effort. He was crossing the porch without noticing her. She stopped him. "Mr. Roark!" "Yes?" "Mr. Roark, I'm so sorry about—" She hesitated demurely. "About what happened this morning." "What?" he asked. "You're being expelled from the Institute. I can't tell you how sorry I am. I only want you to know that I feel for you." He stood looking at her. She knew that he did not see her. No, she thought. It was not that exactly. He always looked straight at people, and his damnable eyes never missed a thing. It was only that he made people feel as if they did not exist. He just stood looking. He would not answer. "But what I say," she continued, "is that if one suffers in this world, it's on account of an error. Of course you'll have to give up the architect profession now, won't you? But then a young man can always earn a decent living clerking or selling or something." He turned to go. "Oh, Mr. Roark," she called. "Yes?" "The dean phoned for you while you were out." For once she expected some emotion from him, and an emotion would be the equivalent of seeing him broken. She did not know what it was about him that had always made her want to see him broken. "Yes?" he asked. "The dean," she repeated uncertainly, trying to recapture her effect. "The dean himself, through his secretary." "Well?" "She said to tell you that the dean wanted to see you immediately, the moment you got back." "Thank you." "What do you suppose he can want now?" "I don't know." He had said, "I don't know." She had heard distinctly, "I don't give a damn." She stared at him incredulously. "By the way," she said, "Petey is graduating today." She said it without apparent relevance. "Today? Oh, yes. It's a great day for me. When I think of how I skimped and slaved to put my boy through school. Now that I'm complaining, I'm not one to complain. Petey's a brilliant boy." She stood drawn up. Her stout little body was corseted so tightly under the starched folds of her cotton dress out to her wrists and ankles. "But of course," she went on rapidly, with the eagerness of her favorite subject, "I'm not one to boast. Some mothers are lucky, and others just aren't. We're all in our rightful place. You just watch Petey from now on. I'm not one to want my boy to kill himself with work, and I'll thank the Lord for any small success that comes his way. But if that boy isn't the greatest architect of this USA, his mother will want to know the reason why." He moved to go. "But what I am doing, grabbing with you like that," she said brightly. "You've got to hurry and change and run along. The dean's waiting for you." She stood looking at him through the screen door, watching his gaunt figure move across the rigid neatness of her parlor. He had always made her uncomfortable in the house, with a vague feeling of apprehension, as if she were waiting to see him swing out suddenly and smash her coffee tables, her Chinese vases, her framed photographs. He had never shown any inclination to do so. She kept expecting it, without knowing why. Roark went up the stairs to his room. It was a large, bare room, made luminous by the clean glow of whitewash. Mrs. Keating had never had the feeling that Roark really lived there. He had not added a single object to the bare necessities of furniture which she had provided. No pictures, no pennants, no cheering human touch. He had brought nothing to the room but his drawings. He had brought nothing to the room but his clothes and his drawings. There were few clothes and too many drawings. They were stacked high in one corner. Sometimes she thought that the drawings lived there, not the man. Roark walked now to these drawings. They were the first things to be packed. He lifted one of them, then the next, then another. He stood looking at the broadsheets. They were sketches of buildings, such as had never stood on the face of the earth. They were as the first houses built by the first man born, who had never heard of others building before him. There was nothing to be said of them, except that each structure was inevitably what it had to be. It was not as if the draftsman had sat over him, pondering laboriously, piecing together doors, windows, and columns, as his whim dictated and as the books prescribed. It was as if the buildings had sprung from the earth and from some living force, complete, unalterable right. The hand that had made the sharp pencil lines still had much to learn, but not a line seemed superfluous. Not a needed plane was missing. The structures were austere and simple, until one looked at them and realized what work, what complexity of method, what tension of thought had achieved the simplicity. No laws had dictated a single detail. The buildings were not classical, they were not Gothic, they were not Renaissance. They were only Howard Roark. He stopped, looking at a sketch. It was one that had never satisfied him. He had designed it as an exercise he had given himself, apart from his schoolwork. He did it often when he found some particular site and stopped before it to think of what building it should bear. He had spent nights staring at this sketch, wondering what had been missing. Glancing at it now, unprepared, he saw the mistake he had made. He flung the sketch down on the table, he bent over it, he slashed lines straight through his neat drawing. He stopped once in a while and stood looking at it, his fingertips pressed to the paper, as if his hands held the building. His hands had long fingers, hard veins, prominent joints, and wristbones. An hour later, he heard a knock at his door. "Come in," he snapped, without stopping. "Mr. Roark!" gasped Mrs. Keating, staring at him from the threshold. "What on earth are you doing?" He turned and looked at her, trying to remember who she was. "How about the Dean?" she moaned. "The Dean that's waiting for you." "Oh," said Roark. "Oh, yes, I forgot." "You forgot?" "Yes." I stopped mid-paragraph there, but I figure that's a good place to leave you off. So, with that, thank you for watching an LZ production and a Bibliophile production. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them below. You can email me here, Facebook me here, tweet me here, Instagram me here. I'm everywhere. You can even telegram me if you have a direct line. I know Morse code. So with that, I bid you farewell.